models, which is the right one for you. And why am I here today to speak to you about software business models? Well, I have a long legacy of business model design and innovation consulting for some big names and big business transformation programs through my career. And these days, I'm advising startups to help them set and evolve their business models to fit their fast-changing business and equally fast-changing markets for software and software services. So a little bit about my background. I founded my firm, Next Curve, with the goal of helping technology vendors and enterprises how to translate emerging technologies and leading edge technologies into value. And to help them figure out how to pursue these market opportunities that are emerging around these technologies. And prior, I was a managing director, or excuse me, a managing partner with Gartner, advising some of the leading technology and media companies on the future of their business in new emerging markets such as 5G, edge cloud computing, AI, and more. And I was also a partner and principal at IBM, PwC, E&Y in past lives. So I've been at this game for a very long time, seen a lot of things, and business model transformation innovation is one of those things. And so why don't we start with business model? The term business model has been thrown around a lot these days. And let me see if I can forward my slides here. Okay, there we go. A lot these days. In fact, many industries, it has become a bit of a buzzword. And sure, true and not so true. I could argue, a great product, great leadership, and execution are much more important than a business model. But that is not to say business model is not an important expression of smart decisions on how a business views itself and structures itself for execution and delivery of value. And so let's take this notion of value, because I think it's important to begin our discussion about a business model. A business model describes, and in implementation is how an organization creates value as a business concern. And if a business model is well-tuned into the needs and the preferences of a target customer segment or market, you have a much better chance of being successful, whatever that ends up meaning to you and your organization. And this is why getting your business model right is more important than many of us might assume or think, or even consider. And I might, I find that many companies have not really done a great job of profiling their business model or understanding what their business model, they don't have, as an organization, a full and comprehensive and shared understanding of what their business model is. And that lends to a number of issues related to corporate identity, the marketing, your products and services, and being able to communicate those within and outside of your organization. And so it's also important to have a clear understanding of what a business model is, it's frequently confused with things such as a go-to-market strategy, corporate or marketing strategy, even value chain, supply chain structure, as well as operating an organizational model. While some of these things are related, that being said, a business model definition is a great way of simultaneously of not only informing and expressing all of these things that I just mentioned. All of these things oftentimes just get confused, however, and I think that's one of the big problems that I observe out there as I speak to companies and talk to folks in the industry. So one good framework that I've used quite a bit in the past and still use today is the business model canvas. And if you haven't seen one before, it's actually pretty simple. It's a 9-sector asymmetric grid that plots out the key aspects of a business model. And the business model framework includes the following. Value proposition, let me see if I can get that up there. Customer segments, customer relationships, customer channels, key activities of the business, key resources, key partners, cost structure, and revenue streams. So these are typically, let's call them the standard aspects of a business model, but you'll see a number of different variations, right? There's no real rule to how you define your framework, but this one's considered sort of the basic framework, and I think it works really well in most instances, right? And a great primer for business models, a business model canvas, and a source of templates that were invented by Alex Osterwalder is his book called Business Model Generation. And it's a great reference. And the business model canvas is a great tool that I've used quite frequently in the past on previous consulting engagements, and today I use it in advising startups and businesses on their, as I work with them to help them design their business models, analyze their business models, and drive innovation within their business. So it's a great tool. So how is the canvas and the business model generation approach useful? It's a great tool for startups to brainstorm their business and creating an initial framework for where you want the business to start and where you would like or would imagine it to take shape in the future, or take form in the future as a business model. And I use the business model ideation and the canvas quite a bit with the startups that I advise. We regularly come back to this exercise and using this tool because, for them, things are so fluid, right? For startups. And I find that the founders need the exercise to distill their thinking as they're learning more about the market and the opportunity they're positioning their company for. So it's also a great tool for established enterprises, that want to reinvent themselves for their core business or for new businesses that they're incubating. And it's also a great way to establish a baseline understanding for what the current business is and articulating what the business would look like if they changed or pursued new market opportunities. It's also a really good framework for competitive analysis. I've used business model canvases and the approach, as the framework as a basis for competitive analysis work that I've done in the past. And the comparative data, it provides some great insights into how competing companies are going to market and approaching different customer segments. And quite honestly, the utility and the value of business model canvases frameworks is pretty much bounded only by your imagination. And I'm a big fan, and it's been one of my favorite and most valuable tools in my consulting and analyst toolkit. So let's see if we can move to the next slide here. Now, we're here to talk about the software business. And so now that we all know what a business model is, let's talk about the business of software. And specifically, let's talk about the business model archetypes of the software industry and discuss how they've evolved over time. And something about archetypes. You should only really have a handful. A good rule of thumb is probably no more than 4. Anything more is just typically a permutation of a far smaller number of archetypes. And I've seen folks claim that there are 12, 20, 50 business models for any particular industry. For software, there are only, I think 4 in my book. I do try to see if there are any additional ones cropping up, but typically, what I see these days is really 4 meaningful archetypes that you can use as a reference. And I base this on actual experience helping some very big conglomerates rationalize their portfolio business models. So let's start off with this first business model archetype, which is the software as a product business model. And in this cloud era, we might think that the business of traditional software, of the traditional software business model of selling software as a product is dead, but surprisingly, it's still happening today. Actually, maybe not so surprisingly, it continues to happen today. So you see companies like SAP, Microsoft, Oracle, and others that continue to develop and sell software as a product. And as a business, software development is the core competency of the business model, right? And it does not seek to get into the business of software service delivery or implementation of the software or IT service delivery. You typically see these kind of the companies that take on this business model partnering in that capacity, or they're just the customers. And many software companies today with traditional software business models are licensing to SaaS providers or partnering with cloud service providers to deliver their software as a software as a service without the software delivery overhead. So that's one of the ways that this business model has kind of evolved in the context of how things have been changing in the industry, especially with cloud computing. And historically, software as a product business models have been highly profitable, with old school, software giants like Microsoft realizing gross margins on the order of 90%, back in the good old days of the licensed software era, if you want to call it that. And this is still a very attractive business model if you can make it work for your business. Okay, so it's not dead by any means. Now the next business model is the all too familiar software as a service business model. And, it's nothing new. Actually, companies back in the late 90s were offering private hosted software services in what were like vanilla instances of popular ERP software at the time, such as PeopleSoft, Oracle, Siebel, SAP, et cetera. And at the time, x86 server virtualization, the idea of cloud-based multi-tenant hosted software servers were not widely adopted, or they simply hadn't been invented yet. And just to be clear, cloud is not a business model. It is a delivery. It's a service delivery model, right? And this is, this is primarily geared toward end users. Back when I was at IBM, I worked with a number of companies on their cloud business strategies and software business model rationalization efforts, and I came to the very simple realization that the SaaS business model is primarily an evolution of IT outsourcing and managing services. So, fundamentally, we've seen this before. It's just been wrapped in a very, a different and cool way, quite honestly. And it's about software service delivery. And part of the value proposition is hiding, the complexity of the IT back-end stuff and, provide that value of software, whether it's for end user computing, communications, or shared business applications. Now, the next business model is the software as a platform business model. And some of you guys will be developing tools, toolkits, and development environments as your software business. And it's pretty synonymous, this whole idea of a software as a platform model is pretty synonymous with the idea of PaaS, or a platform as a service for, and you might be familiar with that term and concept. And this category of, software business model boils down to making sense of the mess that's associated with having lots of different types of software of different types, different technologies and generations, created for us, that we struggle with, right? As well as the fact that, computing is becoming more networked and connected than it was in the past. So, if this is a new emerging opportunity and a business model that really caters to that. And if you've been in the industry for a long time, you're familiar with this problem, and it's the system integration problem, right? And if you're an enterprise, think of all the software you guys use. What are some of the good examples of where this is happening? Well, some popular areas where we're seeing, software as a platform business models emerge, are in the IoT space and AI work. There are companies that are developing vertically and horizontally integrated software platforms and middleware offerings to create this sort of easy button for complex system designs and implementations. Oftentimes, also including hardware. And classically, this is all that middleware and brokering stuff of old. And this business model is geared toward developers and builders of software-based or software-enabled business solutions and applications for end market users. So you're not usually going to be looking at consumers. This is more like a B2B type of play. And from a competency perspective, software as a platform businesses are good at integration. They know how to broker things, though they might not do any of these things themselves. They provide the tools and the environments for these things to be built by developers. They provide the software tools to enable partners and to build the applications and the integrated systems across a portfolio of software. That's fundamentally what the goal is, or the value proposition is for this business model. And oftentimes you're looking at everything as a service hierarchy. PaaS is sort of in between infrastructure as a service and SaaS. Well, another way of looking at it is these platforms are actually an umbrella on top of everything. All that software brings it together and integrates it horizontally and vertically. Okay, and so let's talk about the fourth business model, which is the open source support model. And while this this model might sound like a new one, but it's not. It's been around for quite some time, popularized over 30 years by a company called Red Hat. And now we're seeing this model being used in the telecom industry around Open RAN, and many of the open technology initiatives in that industry, as well as others. And the core value proposition of this software business archetype is to make open source software technologies enterprise, industrial, or carrier grade, right? And this means to fortify and enhance the open source code base and providing support services that are enterprise class. And much like the traditional software licensing model, this is a high gross margin business model. Red Hat squeezed out something like 85% gross margin on licenses and subscriptions of their flavor of Linux, prior to being acquired by IBM. So anyway, now that we've got the archetypes out of the way, why don't we really quickly talk about revenue models, okay? Or monetization models for a moment, as they're sometimes referred to as. Firstly, your revenue model is not your business model. It is part of your business model, and this is a point that many folks I bump into even in industry research and consulting circles, they get this confused. So let's talk about the basic ways that you can monetize your software and services. So the first most probably familiar way of monetizing your software is through licensing. And this is sort of the old school way of doing it, but like I was mentioning before, it's still very relevant today. And basically what you're looking at are licensees that are issued per seat, per processor, per MIP maybe even. So there's a wide range of different formats and mechanisms for licensing. But one of the key challenges of this approach is this issue of piracy. I mean, I think that's probably the most famous problem that this particular revenue model suffers. And unlicensed use, and then there's the associated cost of audits and litigation, right? Now, the third or the second revenue model is the subscription model. So, the benefits are widely touted as being predictable revenue and cash flow. That's not necessarily true if your software services are not sticky, but basically what you're doing here is you're using periodic, tiered, and maybe even usage-based subscription models to charge for software that is being delivered as a service in most instances. And the bottom line, depending on the kind of software or software service you're going to market with, subscription revenues can be they can be a tough sell, especially if you're offering as niche or narrow. It's one of the things you have to be a little bit cautious of. And, comprehensive, the way to think about it is comprehensive, integrated, and high value software services and software work well for subscriptions. And then the final or the third business model, archetype, if you will, is the ad revenue model or ad-based. And one of the things that to understand here is that this is not a freemium model. And quite honestly, I'm not a big fan of this model. I consider this sort of the bottom of the monetization barrel, if you will. But I also understand that it's a necessity for many software companies. And the options for ad-based monetization, they continue to expand, especially with the growing prominence of like app stores and marketplaces that are offering new types of ad placement and monetization schemes. And businesses that go deep with this model, they can run into or contribute to a problem that I'll discuss later. So let's talk about the freemium model for just a moment here. So what about the freemium business model, right? You might be, asking yourself, well, isn't that a business model archetype for software that you're missing on your list? Well, there's a lot of folks who say that their business is based on a freemium business model. Actually, the freemium model is not a business model. It's part of their pricing and customer acquisition / retention strategy, which are aspects of a business's revenue model and or go-to-market strategy, right? And now let's talk about the pros of the freemium strategies. And one is that it's not guaranteed, but these approaches can accelerate user growth or engagement in your software services. And these I call them iffy proxies for revenue growth metrics could position your business well to draw in like advertisers who might be willing to place ads on free versions of your software or subscriptions to your software service. And this is particularly helpful, I suppose, for a lot of startups that want to hedge the risks that they might suffer low rates of converting, gratis users into paying customers. And many of you guys might be, let me see, let's see if I'm getting, apologize. Let me, got it. Okay, so let me see if I can pick up from where okay, now, some of you guys might be saying, well, what about Facebook? They've done pretty well with the advertising model. They're one of the most valuable companies in the world. Well, firstly, I'll argue that Facebook is not a software company. They're a multimedia communications company. And some of us just, thought they were a software company because they have some really good coders and software developers. But they don't sell the software or the software service. They sell ads, full stop. That they sell ads. That's how they make money. That's their business. And I want to impress upon you this about the freemium monetization models, and that they are advertising driven. Facebook's customers are not you. They
Yeah, no worries. Keep going.
Oh, okay, sorry about that. So where was I? Yeah, and so basically, you're the cow, and you go into the hamburgers that, if you've been to the United States, that go into that In-N-Out burger that gets sold to the hungry guy, right? You simply aren't the customer. And surprisingly, this is not as widely known. It's not common sense or common knowledge. It's unfortunately a bit uncommon. Some folks think that they're the customers, and the point I'm trying to make here is that your software and services that go with it, that deliver it. Okay, the services that deliver it are only as good as the people people are willing to pay for it. And as you consider your business model, also consider the value of your business, the value that your business provides, and how it provides it, given the growing privacy crisis that we have online at the moment. So let's move on to the next topic here, which is business model selection principles. And when it comes to the business, I like to say that you have to do it you have to do it the dumb way a few times before you figure out the smart way. And I don't think I think this rings very true for a lot of startups in particular, and some larger companies as well. So what is the best business model for your business? The answer is it depends. And a good starting point is to first understand the basic archetypes, as well as the variety of options you can consider for your revenue model, cost structure, channel strategy, etc., associated with each archetypes. But honestly, business model selection is more of a design art than anything else. That's what I found. And it is more than likely that your business model at any given point in the evolution of your business will be a hybrid of conventional, what you might consider conventional or emerging business model standards. And the truth is that you will be adjusting or even completely revamping your business model at the get-go, or as you begin to listen to real customers and test your offering in the market. And I don't know of anyone who's gotten it right at the outset. In fact, I do a lot of work with my clients on this, figuring out the business model and vetting it. Ultimately, the best business model for your software business is the one that resonates with the market at any given point in time. And I make it sound easy, but it's actually pretty difficult. And then you have to continue tuning your business model to the market. And especially if you're a startup, given that your business is evolving, or at least your perception of the business and the opportunity is evolving so quickly, it can be really challenging compared to if you're, let's say, a slower moving, mature company. So for a moment, think about Amazon. What did they start off with? They were an online bookstore. They made a number of different pivots, right? This whole idea of platform company that didn't exist, it's something that was kind of concocted about 10 years ago. And as many of you know, their online business is not the big revenue driver. What they ended up doing is pivoting a number of times from their original business model, and they started to discover new ways of monetizing whatever it is that they were doing, if you want to call it a platform business that they had. And so they pivoted, and they eventually stumbled upon their third party program and the marketplace, and providing e-commerce software and hosting storefronts on their marketplace. And then eventually they also then stumbled onto their pot of gold, which is AWS, the famous AWS. And so if Amazon has to do it a number of times, you're going to find that you'll be evolving your business model from inception to well into the future of your business, right? So, and it's not uncommon for companies to use, all three monetization models and create a blend of software business model that are based on the archetypes that I described above. Now, Salesforce.com, it's a great example of a company that's done this from a business model perspective, and they're widely known as a SaaS company, but from the beginning they took on some of the attributes of what we see in a software as a product company, which is the development of their own proprietary software product. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not always the case that a SaaS provider actually develops the software that it delivers as a service. Many SaaS players deliver third-party software as a cloud-based, through a cloud-based delivery model, and this has implications on the cost structure and the resource requirements of the business. But it's a nuance to the SaaS business model, right? I wouldn't treat it as a separate business model. And more recently, you have cloud service providers like AWS that are, they're increasingly taking on open source support business model and blending it with more conventional SaaS and software as a product business model for the AI and IoT business segments, which is a really interesting development. And this allows these large players such as Azure and AWS to take what are considered open technologies and creating these walled gardens, walled software platform gardens, to make things a little bit sticky for their enterprise customers. Now let's move on to, I'm sorry, I got distracted here. Okay. And let's move on to partnerships and platforms. Now, the bottom line about partnerships and platforms, it's mostly about accelerating your business and scaling it, right? These days you hear a lot about ecosystem this and ecosystem that in the software industry. For most software companies, especially young ones, startups, they're too small to be ecosystem leaders, right? They're ecosystem participants, and they can't really change their position all that much because they just don't have the scale. And there are only a small number of ecosystem leaders. That's just a reality. And it's probably more important for most software businesses, especially startups, to consider their partnership strategy. And one of the more important guidelines to consider as you look at partnerships is understanding how and where your business is positioned in the extended value chain to the end market customer. And it is, after all, the end market customer who is creating the market and the source of all market participants' revenue. So by examining that, looking at how that's changing, that's a really key input. It's a really key input into into your business model design for your software business. Now, let's talk about platforms really quickly here. And first, there is the cloud, and we're all familiar with the big hyperscale cloud service providers such as AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google GCP. This is an easy one because all of you are will probably agree that public cloud computing has changed how we support, our software, how we deliver it, and how we develop it, and go to market with software as services, and even, not just applications, but eventually functions as we, move beyond containers and move into the whole serverless computing world. Finally, what I want to talk about here really quickly is the matter of app stores. And, given that this is a hackathon and many of you consider yourselves hackers, or developers, I hope I don't offend anyone, this person might be a little bit controversial, but here it goes. So I want to provide a little bit of business model perspective on app stores, and what their role is as an accelerator. And but I want to preface the perspective with the software business is hard. It's a tough one. It's not easy. I mean, I think the media and it just kind of sells the notion that, hey, everyone's making big money, but it's actually a tough, very, very tough business. And it's easy to design and build stuff, but it's difficult, like any business, to build the actual business and design one that's going to garner success, if you want to call it that. Many of you know the app stores are a great way to get your software to market. What you might not appreciate as much, if you haven't examined the various software business models, is how the Apple and Google app stores and others like it have tremendously simplified many of the complexities that software businesses used to have to deal with before, especially around device compatibility, software support, distribution. The list goes on and on, and all the way down to the fundamental technologies, tools, and architectures, payment, XYZ. Okay, all these things software companies need to cobble together and figure out themselves, maintain them, sustain them. Okay, these app stores have simplified a lot of that. And as many of you probably, you've been probably following the epic litigation against Apple and Google app stores, you want to probably aware, and you're probably aware about, and you maybe even be with some of those developers who are complaining about the app store tax. Well, here's something to consider. If you consider the cost structure of a software business model archetype, any of them, SG&A, core technology development, software distribution, all these things that I talked about before, infrastructure cost of delivering services or supporting a marketplace or a platform, that reduces the gross margin of a software company that licenses their software from 90% down to 30%. Okay, in most instances, it would cost you a lot more than 30% of your revenue if you tried to do all this stuff on your own. Okay, build these things, integrate them, and so something to consider, because I don't think that gets talked about a lot, because a lot of us assume these app stores as platforms and acceleration platforms should be provided for free, and that also doesn't make any sense. So anyway, I'm want to leave everyone with some recommendations here on business model. First, I think the most important thing is be clear on what a business model is. If you don't, you probably don't understand the other constructs you will need for designing your business, and then you'll get in trouble. Trust me, you will. I've seen a lot of companies really just on semantics alone just confuse themselves into oblivion. That's not a good thing. So, please, I would highly suggest you do your homework on this stuff. The other thing is, number two, go through the exercise and effort of defining your business model. And, the reason why it's an important tool for articulating your business. And as I said before, so many companies don't actually do this, and their organization doesn't clearly know what their business model is. That sounds strange, but you will be very shocked at how true this is in many instances, okay? And number three, be ready to change and adapt your business model. But you need a starting point, like I said, so do it very early on as a startup especially, and then create a roadmap, articulate it, communicate it, because the only thing that is a given, okay, success is not a given, change is. And you need to accommodate that in how you think about your business, how you evolve your business as well. And now, number four, be judicious about your use of freemium pricing strategies. The reason why I say this is free is not value, okay? People are willing to pay for stuff that they feel is valuable. In fact, those gratis users, their cost, their marketing cost, they're not part of your revenue model. So that's something to be very clear on. And then finally, app stores and cloud computing are great startup accelerators, but understand their impact on cost structure and fit for purpose. I think a lot of the assumptions around cloud computing are misguided. So do your homework, look at, the costs of the price performance metrics for the different kind of workloads, or the overall cost of cloud hosting or delivering your software through public cloud or any variety of cloud computing options that are out there, and more that are coming, especially with edge cloud computing. Do your homework. I think cloud computing, or especially public cloud, has its place. It works great and for certain requirements and needs, and it doesn't make sense for others. And so learn where it doesn't make sense. Okay. And finally, in closing, I'd like to say that the software business is a difficult one, and it is, after all, a business. And building software is far easier and fun, I would argue. And the software business can also be a very good one. So work on that software business model, and it will be the great first step toward building your software business. And so thank you for your attention and interest in this topic. And if you have any questions or would like to get in touch with me, my contact information is provided here. And you can also follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter, and you can also follow my research blog at www.next-curve.com. So again, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your hackathon. I'll take any questions if there are any.
Hi, Leonard. Thank you so much. That was really helpful, I'm sure, for everyone here, and we really appreciate your time.
Yeah, I tried to make it within the time here. So,
as for questions, we don't have time for questions right now, but if anyone has any questions, we'll leave Leonard's LinkedIn profile in the Discord server, and feel free to reach him there.
Okay. All right. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks again.